Hi, disembodied voice back again. With a content warning, this video opines on the most vulnerable populations in society. Jokes, of varying quality, will be made, but ultimately in the spirit of critiquing power and excess. References to the term homeless are in accordance with this article from the nonprofit organization Invisible People. Homelessness. Among the most harrowing and dehumanizing experiences ever. When society condemns the poor and the vulnerable to an unsheltered life under the blistering hot sun, the freezing cold pavement, and the scathing judgment of passers-by. Many often ponder, why is homelessness allowed to exist in the United States, the richest country on the planet? How did it get so bad? Well, I could spend this video analyzing the life choices, the mental capacity, or the daily habits of people living unsheltered on the streets. Or I could shine a light on the most pernicious cause of homelessness. Housed people. Yes, while homeless populations constantly have their mental health questioned, the issue seems to be driving the rest of society kinda insane. Housed politicians seem less interested in actual policy solutions and more into poop. Housed social media influencers seem undeterred from turning people's most undignified moments into monetized content.
Because I'm just $2 short to get my bus.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have like $2 something for me? The first person who helped me, I would be blessed with $100. Is there any chance I can give a hug for you?
Yeah, of course.
Thanks.
Bro, have you seen these engagement numbers? Some housed people seem totally cool with utter cruelty.
So I always keep this fake Hollywood money in my car, so when a homeless person asks for money, then I give them like a fake $5 bill.
Video posted on social media of a man spraying water at a homeless woman in San Francisco on Montgomery Street.
This man is a national hero.
I thought it was okay to clean up the trash.
Bet he caved in and apologized. And most of all, housed thought leaders swoop in to explain the problem to the public in the wrongest ways possible.
In fact, in a recent study in Ottawa, Canada, Housing First participants were 5 times more likely to die than a control group that was simply left on the streets.
Resulting in misunderstanding, undue animus, and social division, not just against the homeless, but between left and right. This is part 2 of my video series on housing, by focusing on the plight of those who lack it. I'll focus on both the individual and the structural causes maintained by those who don't have to worry about housing. I'll also try to examine the conceptual complexities, what the science says, and pose ways for us to feel less doomer about humanity. All of us has seen it before. We think we know what it looks like, but let's think about it for a minute. Most people tend to picture a middle-aged man completely down and out on his luck. But if you look at the data, in the US, the most likely age of a person spending a night in a homeless shelter is an infant. Like, under 1 year old. One misconception of homelessness is that it's only about the people that you see on the streets, in cars, or public places. Those folks represent a portion of homelessness who are unsheltered, whereas homelessness can still rage off the streets, largely out of public view, in the form of sheltered homelessness, which is when people lack the ability to house themselves but rely on friends, relatives, emergency shelters, or safe havens. Just because a person doesn't witness homelessness on their way to work doesn't mean it can't be happening all around them. Child homelessness is very real, but in actuality, you would almost never encounter an unaccompanied homeless child on the streets. Ever see viral content featuring would-be homeless children?
Can you help me? I'm homeless.
Where's your family at?
They left me.
Your family left you?
What?
How long have you been here?
Would you show compassion if you came across a homeless child? Like for part 3, you heartless ghoul. In reality, it's extremely rare to see an unsheltered, unaccompanied child on the street, because these cases are highly prioritized for shelter and services, and many are immediately placed in protective custody by functions like Child Protective Services in the US. The sheltered-unsheltered difference can really mislead people. I'm sure this viral content is well-meaning, but it's definitely not a real simulation of homelessness. We also tend to think that all homelessness is a static state, but in reality, it's much more fluid. In California, according to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development point-in-time count, a majority, 2/3 of unhoused Californians are in short-term homelessness, as opposed to chronically homeless, defined as people who are homeless for more than a year or fallen into it 4 times within 2 years. What this means is people aren't born into homelessness. They fall into it every day. And just as some fall into it, many are pulled out of homelessness at the same time. One nonprofit, Union Station Homelessness Services, boasts a 97% retention rate, meaning that 90% of the people they serve remain stably housed. So for those who are very cynical that homeless people are just this stubborn, immovable population that we just keep throwing money at, in reality, thousands are exiting homelessness every day, telling us that this is a very solvable issue. Cool. Well, why haven't we solved it then? More on that later. Finally, what is a home? Moreover, what really is a home to be lessed, or a house to be und? And no, I'm not waxing philosophical here. If we think about it, a makeshift house or shelter doesn't always have to be a tent. It can be something much more robust, like made of rock,
stone,
wood,
please. Wood, please.
Mud, sheet metal, or any number of materials one can find and piece together. Wool, plastic bottles, I don't know, Legos. Such are what makes up squatter settlements, shantytowns, favelas in major metropolitan regions across the world. I mean, minus the Legos. In fact, this type of housing, despite its dilapidated and less dignified qualities, has been credited for keeping homelessness from getting much worse for poor and vulnerable populations worldwide. It's not just about having shelter, it's about being able to live and find self-sufficiency in proximity to thriving economies. Back to America, where this type of stuff, doesn't fly. Because homelessness is not just the lack of a house, it's about the lack of space and permanence. So even if you have the material to build a robust shelter, many societies aren't gonna let you build it there. Wanna live here? Ooh, sorry, that's owned by someone else. Who will let you live there if you pay them $4,000 a month. That's a sidewalk. You can't block it. Ooh, a public park? Hello, 911. I've spotted an illegal Lego encampment. Unfortunately, every square inch of society seems purposed for something, and chances are, it's not for you. My point? Homelessness is not just encased within the sphere of the individual experiencing it. It is also equally, if not more, about the environment in which that individual is finding their way. We, society, collectively designed that environment, allocating space and resources through our chosen economic systems and our policy choices. In other words, if homelessness is a portrait, you need to focus on the negative space. And that's what this video essay is all about. Okay, that negative space lecture I just gave you, well, it's a little bit complicated for the layperson to fully understand on its own. Competing with that explanation are a plethora of wrong explanations out there that are more cognitively convenient and sometimes emotionally gratifying. So before I can get into how it all works, I have to get into all the ways it doesn't work, despite popular belief. Because society is plagued with misconceptions on homelessness, not helped at all by willful mischaracterizations from some unsavory thought leaders who seek less to inform and seek more to inflame opinion. I'll try to debunk the top myths, keeping bad jokes and old recycled memes to a minimum, by pointing out the best research I can find. I'm a good homelessness literature. Most people see there's a clear relationship between homelessness and mental health. One of the largest and most comprehensive studies on homelessness conducted by the University of California, San Francisco, found that homeless populations have staggering rates of mental health conditions, with 82% of their representative sample of homeless California adults reporting some period in their life with a serious condition, like anxiety, depression, or hallucinations. Among them, more than a quarter experienced hospitalization for a mental condition. It's true, someone suffering from, say, psychosis will have a harder time holding down a job or a place to live, thereby increasing the risk of falling into homelessness. But consider this. Not only can mental health issues push someone closer to homelessness, the reverse can also be true. Homelessness can severely worsen serious pre-existing mental health problems. The UCSF study was especially strong because it added qualitative research, aka going out and asking people to describe in greater detail beyond what just the numbers tell you. People experiencing homelessness often spoke of intensely distressing scenarios, such as losing all of their material possessions, including their birth certificates or IDs or smartphone in tent sweeps by police, or getting assaulted or robbed, or experiencing extreme sleep deprivation, because falling asleep often leads to you getting assaulted or robbed. In fact, more than a third, 38%, experienced either physical or sexual violence during their episode of homelessness, largely perpetrated by strangers. And it's not an uncommon story that those with mental health conditions were able to manage their symptoms when being stably housed, but the stresses and dangers of homelessness can completely destabilize all that. Especially when, as shown in the study, mental health treatment services are extremely hard to come by if you're homeless. Mental health and homelessness is not just a one-way causal relationship, but this assumption has led to other common misconceptions around mental health, including the push to revive the asylum. Sanitarium! In October 2023, one of Donald Trump's campaign promises was,
"When I'm back in the White House, we will use every tool, lever, and authority to get the homeless off our streets. And for those who are severely mentally ill and deeply disturbed, we will bring them back to mental institutions where they belong, with the goal of reintegrating them back into society once they are well enough to manage."
Such a statement assumes there was a time of American greatness, if you will, when large numbers of mentally ill individuals were placed in hospitals, a technical term, inpatient psychiatric hospitalization, where they could not harm themselves or the public, and perhaps receive the treatment they needed. Perhaps. Deinstitutionalization, aka the emptying of psychiatric hospitals in the 60s and 70s, was therefore thought to have created a wave of mentally ill people, all of a sudden banished to the streets, or prison, left to roam wild. First off, mental institutions had a history of insane cruelty. For a long time, it was essentially used as a second prison, warehousing patients against their will and away from their own community, where they were subjected to abuse and neglect with little evidence of effectiveness. Even to this day, inpatient psychiatric hospital services as they currently exist have little to no evidence base. Of course, academics might say it a little bit more differently. Quote, "Inpatient psychiatric hospital services as they currently exist have little to no evidence base." Other studies paint a much worse picture, showing environments of fear, neglect, coercion, and dehumanization. Secondly, people who advocate to bring back the institution might not be getting the history all that right. For example, deinstitutionalization happened in the late 60s and early 70s, whereas the modern state of unsheltered homelessness that we all recognize for the past few decades began to spike only decades later. The more likely explanation rests on ineffective community-based solutions, such as not providing adequate housing and the gutting of government benefits. A study published in the British Journal of Psychiatry looked at cohorts, i.e., tracked individuals, finding no evidence of people directly going from institutions to prison or being homeless. This is not to say that bringing back the asylum system would be outright bad. Perhaps because we f***ed it up so bad, the pendulum has swung too far away from the idea of psychiatric hospitalization, and that there can maybe be a more humane and science-based treatment utilizing modern methods and medications. But until then, we really don't have a humane or viable version of it. Besides, Simply bringing back the asylum system is not going to solve the homelessness problem on its own, especially when we know homelessness is driven by so many other variables. All right, so mental health is one part of the homelessness takes trifecta. You also can't have a discussion on homelessness without talking about, and I'll have Weezer cue us in, about being on drugs. While we're on the topic of downward spirals, I mean, what's with these lyrics? Did they just farm out their lyrics to the lion mascot from Dare? I digress. Just like mental illness, there's a strong relationship between drugs and homelessness. It's true, drugs increase the risk of falling into homelessness and severely impedes one's ability to rebound. The UCSF survey shows that nearly 2/3 of homeless participants reported regular usages of amphetamines, cocaine, or non-prescribed opioids. The archetype of a drug-addicted, unhoused person always looks the same: a loafer who can't be helped because giving them any type of assistance is just a means for them to get their next fix. But just like we argued before, the way that it all works might not be as clear-cut as you think, as the UCSF report paints a more complicated picture. For one, drug use is much lower for homeless adults in families versus single or young adults, telling us the population doesn't fit one drug-addicted stereotype. And the reason people use drugs may not always be what you think. It's also used as a coping mechanism for trauma, pain, depression, or just the sheer reality of living on the streets. One homeless participant, John, explains that drugs are quite a convenient tool for you to stay awake to protect yourself and your belongings. It also reportedly helps keep your energy levels up to engage in income-generating activities for survival, such as collecting recycling, selling goods, performing odd jobs, etc. Unfortunate as it is, substance abuse was also reportedly an intrinsic part of social relationships on the streets. Even when participants wanted to seek treatment to curb their habit, drugs are usually very available through other people, especially those who you build mutual trust with, say to have your back at night while you sleep, or to just watch your belongings when you're gone. Ann Miskey of the nonprofit Union Station Homeless Services points out that many people become addicts after experiencing homelessness rather than before.
An interesting fact that many people may not know is that more people become addicts after becoming homeless than before. Life on the streets is brutal, and some people turn to substance use to help with the trauma, the pain, the fear of living on the streets. Others can no longer access prescription medication, so they end up using, again, illegal substances or street drugs, and it can create addiction for people. It absolutely is true. But again, the rates of people on the street suffering from addiction is no higher than it is for people in housing. You just see it more.
The UCSF data confirms this to an extent, showing young adults having huge increases in substance abuse since becoming homeless. Let's look at the problem zoomed out with a state-by-state comparison to shed more light on where drug use is the highest. The CDC maps overdose death rates by state. Can you guess which states have the highest overdose deaths per capita? Perhaps ones with more liberal-leaning, crime-friendly administrations? The states in blue are where death rates are the highest. And what we can see here is... Oh, I'm sorry, this is the 2020 presidential electoral map. How'd that happen? The states in blue are where overdose death rates are the highest, with black being the worst, showing that some Eastern conservative political bloc states like Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, or Tennessee, drug usage does not necessarily correlate with political leanings. By the way, great color choice, CDC. Hey, we're onto something here. If we really want to understand causes of homelessness, maybe we have to start comparing geographies. Some regions, for example, might have a lot more drug use than others. Therefore, if substance abuse was the key driver of homelessness, we'd be able to see it play out right in front of us. Out of all US states, the one that comes closest to catching the dragon is West Virginia, Funny enough, despite high rates of drug abuse, including fentanyl, the rate of homelessness is actually really low compared to the rest of the US. So if drugs were truly the factor, wouldn't we be seeing rampant homelessness through the Blue Ridge Mountains, the Shenandoah? This type of approach, using comparative geographies to understand causes of homelessness, is adopted in a very important recent publication, Homelessness is a Housing Problem, by Colburn and Aldern. Not only do they look at regional variation in substance abuse, which shows very little correlation to rates of homelessness, they look at other factors as well. Remember we talked about mental health? Well, they also show it's a non sequitur. In other words, regions with high rates of serious mental illness also do not seem to experience high rates of homelessness. In fact, they use this model to examine a variety of other factors put forth by armchair analysts: warm weather, poverty rates, the availability of welfare services, and yes, liberal policies. Shouldn't all of these factors contribute to high rates of homelessness? Well, the answer may shock you. For now, I hope this has given you an appreciation for how hard it is to pin down a simple causal relationship on homelessness. We now come to the third part of the homelessness myth trifecta. And this one's pretty old. In fact, older than the trees, younger than the mountains, growing like a breeze. That homelessness is simply an attitude problem. That if you're not afflicted with mental health or addiction, that really, you only have yourself to blame.
So tonight, I'm going to talk directly to the homeless, drug addicts, and ex-cons. You're better than this. Pick yourself up and pay attention. See the real you and say to yourself, then you hop on a bus and get as far away from your sleazy crew as possible. Every block and get yourself a job, any start. Your life will change if you do these things. And you don't have to thank me.
To many, homelessness is a choice and can be reversed if you simply reformed your own laziness, pessimism, or victim mentality. There are, of course, many sophisticated social theorists of the "have you tried not being homeless" school of thought. And many of these theorists can be found on social media. Some assert that homelessness is pretty easy since, in place of working, you can just panhandle or beg for money, relying on passersby to supplement your income. Wait a tick. Passersby. Did homeless people just come across the most brilliant passive income scheme ever?
Hi, I'm Streeter Sweeper, and I have built a $1 million passive income empire using one secret that Big Homeless doesn't want you to know. No investors, and cash flow positive.
Here we go!
Participation may get you assaulted or robbed, which Streeter Sweeper bears no liability.
When in reality, panhandling makes you pretty much for money. On good days, at minimum wage. The UCSF study also indicates that panhandling is not a really effective way of generating income compared to other methods like recycling or selling goods or performing odd jobs. Yet despite there really being no easy income solution, there have been a spate of influencers to try to prove otherwise. This particular influencer was so convinced that she voluntarily decided to become homeless herself for 3 hours.
Yesterday, I pretended to be homeless for 3 hours, and I realized that if you're homeless, you're there by choice. Like, you are there by choice, 100% having that experience.
But let's give her a fair shake. What happened to her in those 3 hours? Did she come by money or human kindness much more easily than expected?
Just the way that I chose to go experience that by choice. Or you're welcome to create a bunch of bullshit stories in your life.
Well, we'll never know because she spends the entire video talking about how it's simply a mindset shift. Because to her, homelessness involves sitting down and thinking to yourself.
How much you take for granted.
However, you should know an attempt was made. I repeat, an attempt was made. In summer of 2020, at the height of the COVID pandemic, entrepreneur and aspiring influencer Mike Black decided to voluntarily put himself into homelessness
I'm Mike Black, and starting July 10th, I'm leaving behind my 7-figure business, putting all my belongings in storage, I'm draining my bank account to $0, and I won't even have a place to live.
And show the world that it is possible to start with nothing and get this. Make $1 million within a year. In order to make this, quote, $1 million comeback fair, he cut himself off from all resources and networks, while only promising to use revenue generated from his business and his wage-based labor. He wanted to prove to the world that from anyone's lowest point, even you too can make a comeback.
This is about getting back on our feet. This is about working harder than we've ever worked before. This is about seeing opportunity that's been created by this new world. This is about reinventing yourself.
And so did he? No. He did come about $65,000 toward his $1 million goal, which some would say is pretty impressive. Others might say, hey, that's not even 7%. You might already guess that Mike's homelessness LARP is not in any way generalizable to the homeless experience. Sure, he did a fairly good job of setting ground rules to make his challenge fair, but he also managed to avoid unsheltered homelessness on day freaking 1. Just as he was about to spend his first night on the streets of downtown Austin, just as his will was disintegrating, he scores a couch from a very generous stranger who allowed him to stay indefinitely, effectively eliminating his unsheltered status from the get-go. From that point on, he had a home base to start his income-generating activities like flipping items on Craigslist or applying to telemarketing jobs. And in a stroke of dubiously lacking in detail luck, he eventually finds a real estate professional to co-sign a house for him, saying that he negotiated with a, quote, partner, which he found, quote, networking with real estate.
So what made this a little bit more challenging to try to pull this off is I had to network with real estate investors that I could partner with on this, but I'll do everything.
And to use that house to collect revenue through rents while he himself lived rent-free.
This is an exciting day for me because I get to show you guys how you go from nothing to living rent-free, baby.
Jocelyn Figueroa, a writer for the nonprofit organization Invisible People, who is also formerly homeless, took note of this project, sharing about her similar situation of finding a housing broker, which became her lifeline to escaping homelessness, all the while feeling that she would not have been entrusted with that opportunity if she wasn't a young, educated white person. Mike's appearance didn't necessarily exhibit the homelessness archetype with all of his business know-how and sales lingo.
You go like, whoa, this guy's an investor. That's what she's gonna think. I'm like, no, homeless 3 months ago.
Not to mention his media skills, bolstered by an entire production team on the side for him to produce his videos. And even though he was supposedly all in and no turning back going into the challenge, his background and privilege afforded him an abort button. At any time, he could return to his upper middle class lifestyle, his stably housed girlfriend, who, by the way, was helping out with his e-commerce business from his homeless state. But I don't want to vilify this guy. In fact, to his credit, there were some interesting nuggets from his experience about poverty and upward mobility. He did receive constant rejections, likely due to his lack of networks or being resource constrained. In the end, even though he was stably housed, he ended up abandoning the project altogether because he came down with a serious medical condition. Which does make you wonder, what happens to the vast majority of people experiencing homelessness or instability, suffering from a major life incident, who don't have the luxury of pulling the parachute like Mike did? I want to make clear that through his experience, he was careful not to say that his challenge was all about homelessness, but rather that he wanted to showcase his entrepreneurial edge in extreme circumstances for other aspiring entrepreneurs. But in the end, that is a painfully naive position to hold, to assume that audiences would not confuse the two and use this story, if he were successful, as proof that homelessness is simply a choice. And you were definitely reminded of that every now and then whenever he would chest thump over each of his small victories.
I'm starting a coffee brand. I have a coffee dude now in Austin. I mean, everything's going in the direction. Dude, 3 months ago, I was homeless. You can change your reality like this. It hasn't even been 3 months. All you need is that one thing, and that one thing leads to another thing, leads to another thing. So wherever you are right now, put in the work. You can change your reality.
Whether or not Mike realized, his experiment was a teachable moment about how even someone with pure hustle culture flowing through their veins can still be shot down by the crippling realities of homelessness. Hold on a second, streeter sweeper. You're trying to hide something. What's that green bar? It's nothing. Aha! What about welfare handouts? Doesn't that actually make homelessness easy? Yeah, about that benefits column in the UCSF study. A lot of that is from normal payouts like Social Security for the elderly, food stamp programs, and veteran benefits, not necessarily things that are exclusively for people experiencing homelessness. What we can say is that these benefits are a very important lifeline for many experiencing it, but do not amount to nearly enough to meet basic needs of safety and security. Here's a question. If people were truly compelled to homelessness due to generous welfare programs, wouldn't we see massive spikes of it in places where these services are more available? Wouldn't these places act as beacons for lazy people to flock towards so they can continue living off the teats of liberal compassion?
California love.
This welfare magnet theory was actually tested in Colburn and Aldern's work, which I realize I'm citing so many times I'm going to need a shorthand for them. I mean, it's a mouthful of a title. Homelessness is a Housing Problem by Greg Colburn and Clayton Aldern. Can we just call it, I don't know, Dern and Burn?
Let's see what you got now, Chester. Okay, man, let's turn and burn.
Genius, Streeter. When looking at the availability of social service provision by geography, aka a state's maximum monthly cash benefit divided by its median rent, they find, quote, no relationship between the relative generosity of welfare benefits and family homelessness. If generous cash assistance drew people experiencing homelessness into a given state, we would expect to see higher per capita rates of homelessness in these places. We don't. But don't take my word for it. You should probably turn and burn and pick up this book. God, f***ing terrible. They also use the same test to negate the assumption that homelessness thrives in warmer climate. Turns out, it also doesn't. Mass migration of homelessness to welfare magnets is also not a thing if you consider UCSF's findings that many people become homeless within the city they originate. Even though there is evidence of homelessness being pushed from suburbs to the cities, quote, 90% of participants became homeless in California, having been last housed in the state. People who experience homelessness in California are Californians. 75% of participants lived in the same county where they were last housed. Finally, I have to tackle the choice camp assumption that there are plenty of people who simply don't want to be helped. This is called service resistance, aka that plenty of offers of shelter and assistance are out there, which unhoused people keep refusing, presumably out of mental health, drug addiction, laziness, yada yada. Spoiler, there is no evidence that anyone does not want a comfortable place to sleep, store belongings, or practice proper hygiene. A recent survey of the Orange County homeless population showed just that. A vast majority of people either partake or seek out services. If people are not partaking in services, they might not have found them. The same study shows that more than half of those interviewed have not had any contact from outreach personnel or case managers in the last 3 months. And of those who did have contact, less than half were connected to services. To make things worse, people often get frustrated and hopeless during the service-seeking process. Over half, 52% of participants in the UCSF study reported being negatively impacted by extended waits on wait lists. One participant reported being on a housing wait list for 3 years Quote, "How long can the waiting list be? But they tell us the same thing all the time. You're next, you're next. It's just stressful." People sometimes disappear from shelters, which some might chalk up to service resistance. But if you dig deeper, shelters can be pretty scary places. Sometimes there is improper oversight. Sometimes people meet unsavory personalities in the next bed over. Sometimes people find out that romantic partners or close friends or pets may not be able to accompany them into that shelter. So if people refuse service, it's no wonder that they might be disaffected with the services themselves rather than simply refusing help. Kayla Robbins, writer for Invisible People, puts it well. "If I offered you a moldy sandwich I found at the back of the fridge and you declined, you wouldn't be sandwich resistant. It's just that the sandwich you were offered did not meet your needs. And if I offered you a pot of gold at the top of a mountain you can't climb, you're not pot of gold resistant. You just had access barriers. So why is it different when we're talking about unhoused people?" Homeless choice theory also follows the belief that the problem can be reversed if there's adequate punishment to discourage being homeless.
This new policy of mass decriminalization has just concentrated the problems and fed into a sense of greater lawlessness.
AKA, snowflake leftist city administrations are too afraid to intervene and instead treat homeless people as a national park treasure not to be disturbed from their natural habitats. You just gotta be more mean. Many will point out the fact that homelessness tends to thrive in large cities, and most cities have Democratic mayors. Case closed. But wait, if Democrats cultivate homelessness, why are rates of homelessness low in Democratic strongholds like Chicago, Detroit, and Cleveland? It's almost as somebody could have investigated the relationship between permissive policies and homelessness in a piece of research.
Okay, man, let's turn and burn.
Yes, Colburn and Aldern also looked at this, pointing out that harsh enforcement policies such as tent sweeps and stripping people's right to shelter only serves to shuffle the problem around and temporarily push it out of sight rather than eliminating it. Quote, "For the permissive policy's argument to carry any water, we need to see evidence that stronger policing and more restrictive ordinances reduces rates of homelessness, whether intra or interregionally. That evidence is non-existent." That's why I never understood why tent clearance was ever an appealing solution in the first place. Why should anyone be satisfied with essentially sweeping the problem under the rug? Great that this area has been swept. I'm confident that this problem won't persist or manifest elsewhere. Homelessness is a housing problem. Sorry. So what does cause homelessness, if not mental health, drug addiction, or not being a big enough dick to homeless people? Well, if there's one variable that seems to ring most significant when looking at geographical variation, Colburn and Aldern find that after testing all of these assumptions, one correlates most with homelessness. And that is people not having homes. Nobel Prize in economics, please. Okay, to elaborate, by not having homes, I mean that unhealthy housing markets are the best predictor of homelessness rates. Housing prices and rents go up when demand goes up, especially in the midst of supply-constrained markets. This is in part caused by homeowning not in my backyarders, aka NIMBYs, blocking new housing, especially in thriving economic hubs like cities or surrounding areas. It's painfully simple. There's not enough housing to go round. Housing costs rise, thereby you get homelessness. Regional variation in rates of homelessness can be explained by the costs and availability of housing. Housing market conditions explain why Seattle has 4 times the per capita homelessness of Cincinnati. Housing market conditions explain why high poverty cities like Detroit and Cleveland have low rates of homelessness. People with a variety of health and economic vulnerabilities live in every city and county in our sample. The difference is the local context in which they live. High rental costs and low vacancy rates create a challenging market for many residents in a city, and those challenges are compounded for people with low incomes and or physical or mental health concerns. To some, it is really hard to grasp an answer that is so simple. But really, think about it. You have one of the biggest recipes for inequality where urban hubs have explosions of very high-paying jobs, and the region refuses to build more housing, especially in sprawled out suburban areas within commute distance to those jobs. This backward style of urban development encapsulates not only San Francisco, but really the rest of California and other wealthy West Coast economic hubs. This may or may not be the first time you've seen top X myths about homelessness. I am, after all, streeter sweeper, and my angle is not only to tackle popular myths, it's also about tackling an ecosystem that is motivated to entrench those myths by people who love misrepresenting information, so much to the point that you can't help but think it's willful and for personal gain. It was around the height of the COVID-19 pandemic that the topic of homelessness began to ramp up in politically right-wing discourse. As crime and homelessness spiked, so did fear, which was the perfect moment for convenient narratives to emerge, to characterize homelessness, people shooting up and defecating on sidewalks, as the natural result of leftist politics. In come a string of thought leaders acting as brave truth-sayers in the face of potential cancellation. Ugh. However, key among these figures right now is a guy named Michael Shellenberger. And to introduce him, well, really it's hard to know how to describe this guy because he's a conservative activist who started out as an environmentalist, but then became a climate skeptic, then prided himself on being a homelessness advocate, later a COVID-19 vaccine skeptic, and now a free speech expert and a department chair of politics, censorship, and free speech. Look, there's nothing wrong with dancing around different realms of expertise. I mean, I appreciate a good generalist. If you look at my videos, you'll see that I refuse to pick a lane, but this is a whole new level. Shellenberger seems to want to bend into the wind more than one of those inflatable tube guys, willing to jump on any wagon that panders to right-wing audiences, an ambulance chaser of the discourse, if you will. In 2022, Shellenberger came out with the book San Francisco. Haha, I get it. Essentially a right-wing treatise on the homelessness problem, arguing that liberal attitudes are blinding us to homelessness's hard truths, and thus the problem is allowed to fester unchecked. And look, the city of San Francisco is objectively bad when it comes to homelessness. And I'll agree that the city government has shown itself to be perfectly capable of squandering resources and following misguided policies. I live here. I see it every day. Unfortunately, that is the only thing we can maybe agree on. The book is otherwise a prime example of how to misrepresent the truth while really trying to gain favor of audiences hungry to have their beliefs validated. His arguments rest on the same tired and failed premises, that drug addiction, mental health, and excessive compassion are the primary culprits causing homelessness. We've examined all three of those things already, but I can't go on without pointing out the ways in which this book was particularly bad. I admit he does do his research and cites lots of sources. At the same time, there is a surprisingly high chance that upon following those sources, you'll find a lot of cherry picking, willful misrepresentation, or simple unawareness that the source actually contradicts his arguments on the whole. His inexperience in the area of housing economy and homelessness shows when he accidentally or willfully misunderstands common homelessness data collection methods such as the point-in-time count, aka pit count, which represents the number of homeless people on a given night. This oopsie in particular was spotted by Peter Shamshiri of the If Books Could Kill podcast.
People understand. He says, quote, San Francisco's health department in 2019 estimated that 4,000 of the city's 8,000 homeless are both mentally ill and suffering from substance abuse. That jumped out to me because I've never seen an estimate even close to that. So I tracked down the report. The reason that Shellenberger gets it wrong is because he didn't read the report. He just read a San Francisco Chronicle article about the report, which used the 4,000 number, and then he backfilled the denominator without knowing which metrics they were actually using. And how do I know that? Because I read the report, and they say 18,000 over and over again. There is literally no way you can read the report.
Shellenberger's not the only person to misuse homeless stats to inflate the problem. Take a look at these guys.
7.2 billion. Spread over 172,000 people. Why, you can buy every homeless person a Tesla with that kind of money.
Sure, it looks damning on the surface, but this whole dividing budgets by the homeless population as the denominator is pretty ill-advised for any homelessness researcher, given that a lot of homelessness programs are geared at prevention and providing support for people on the brink of becoming homeless, like through rental assistance, but have not quite made the count. Time and time again, this type of statistical maneuvering gets weaponized to embellish the problem, whether it be from armchair reactionaries or research fellows. Need I remind you about homelessness being a fluid population, aka many fall into and out of homelessness at the same time. They're not just some immovable group of people with a force field around them, vaporizing any assistance money that gets thrown their way. Shellenberger's biggest factual error, however, is stating that housing markets have nothing to do with homelessness, misrepresenting mountains of research as this source, and this source, and this source, and maybe this source can affirm otherwise. And yet, he writes, nor can housing prices explain the discrepancy. Palo Alto and Beverly Hills have mild climates and expensive housing, but don't have San Francisco's homeless problem. Yeah, never mind that these are exclusive, manicured suburbs on the outskirts of urban hubs, where homelessness is actually thriving. Homelessness is a regional problem. What's your sample size, dude? The autonomous town of McMansion Hills, population 4, celebrates its 0% homelessness rate. What's their secret? Find out at 6. All of this half-assed empirical inquiry culminates into his main point that homelessness boils down to choice, with an entire chapter devoted to how the unhoused fail to reach their potential because society is too busy treating them like victims. The lesson for anyone who cares about expanding human freedom as opposed to trying to control others is that we should be communicating to people that they have far more freedom, not less freedom, than they realize. The more you play the victim, the more of a victim you'll become. And that's the takeaway. Make sloppy but professional sounding arguments to support narratives that feel true and not are true. Which brings us to San Francisco. Is it really that bad? The feels true narratives are especially strong here, suggesting that San Francisco is not only worse than bad, it's ground zero for the homelessness problem. Pundits, thought leaders, and journalists alike have shown how easy it is to ride the wave of the so-called San Francisco doom loop narrative, aka excessive tolerance for bad behavior on the streets has triggered a downward spiral of lawlessness, divestment, and deterioration of everyday life. Let's revisit the question of drugs in San Francisco, where you'll find no shortage of opinions.
But what we need are for these Democratic officials to stop being useful idiots for the Chinese Communist Party. And they are allowing these open drug scenes in our cities.
Shellenberger points out that the liberal leanings of San Francisco politics instated a way too lefty district attorney too afraid to prosecute fentanyl dealers. In San Francisco, he writes, in 2020, Boudin announced that he was not going to prosecute street-level drug dealers because, in part, they are, quote, themselves victims of human trafficking. Let's follow that source for a sec. Dude, that's like not what he said. I mean, criticize progressive figures, fine, but why do you have to be so bad faith about it? We have established that there's a clear relationship between substance use and homelessness. So it's only predictable that my city and county of San Francisco, with its staggering homeless population, tops all the charts on drug usage and overdose death rates per capita, only behind that of Walker County, Alabama, Perry County, Kentucky, Montour County, Pennsylvania, Conecuh County, Green County, Philadelphia County, Jasper County, South Carolina County, Washington County, Meigs County, Portsmouth City, Virginia. Okay, I'm not going to condone the free exchange and uses of drugs. They're bad, okay? Weezer taught me that. But if fentanyl was an Olympic sport, well, let's just say San Francisco wouldn't even come close to bronze. Content warning, infant death. Want to make narratives especially potent? Add babies. Better yet, add babies on drugs. In December 2022, a 10-month-old baby appeared to have suffered an overdose on fentanyl at a San Francisco park. Up front, the baby's okay. But can we just pause for a second and realize how weird it is to say that a baby overdosed? Because I mean, like, what dose of fent is actually safe for a kid? I mean, come on. This immediately fomented a public outcry, blaming city leaders for allowing homeless individuals to loiter at public parks and leave traces of deadly drugs around for children to pick up and put in their mouth. Michael Shellenberger even came onto the scene to investigate. In one respect, the fear is warranted. No one should feel unsafe at public parks. And it's irresponsible as to contaminate with fentanyl a place where children play. But this story shows how narrative around drugs and homelessness can trump reality. Note, it's completely unclear how and where the child got a hold of fentanyl, whether at the public park, some other place, or through other means, like through a direct relation, like a friend or a family member. It's also important to note that, at least of recent history, that no infant deaths from opioids has occurred within the city limits of San Francisco. They have certainly occurred in the Northern California Bay Area near San Francisco. In fact, 6 have died since 2020. Tragic, but does that mark anything particularly special about San Francisco or its politics? Certainly no doom loop editorials were written in Florida when Enora Lavener died of fentanyl poisoning, when Nicholas Dominici suffered an overdose in New York, or when 2 separate incidents occurred in West Virginia. I'm not sure if the situation permits levity here, but let's move away from babies to poop. You heard me right. Poop. During the 2024 presidential primaries, GOP hopeful Governor Ron DeSantis flashed a poop map to taunt his debate rival, former mayor of San Francisco, now governor of California, Gavin Newsom, for his supposed pro-homelessness policies.
This is a map of San Francisco. There's a lot of plots on that. You may be asking, what is that plotting? Well, this is an app where they plot the human feces that are found on the streets of San Francisco.
A powerful message, to be sure, for a guy trying to disassociate his own image from poop, following a series of gaffes and political jokes. I won't go over them here, just Google it. No, really. What, you expect me to make a montage or something? Look, many don't realize how long it takes to make these videos. You have to make tough content choices sometimes. You don't have the luxury of time.
Human feces.
And I will not let you down.
Ron DeSantis loves sticking his fingers where they don't belong.
Human feces.
Now it's quiet.
And I will not let you down.
And we're not just talking about pudding.
Yeah, I think we've got just a massive number of people online to serve as restraining.
Name's Meatball. I didn't like that one too much, but they came out.
Serve as restraining.
Human feces.
Serve as restraining.
Human feces.
Okay, let's break this down seriously. The map he pulled out wasn't particularly scientific and appeared to be taken from the platform formerly known as Twitter. This and maps like it have been called into question for having no scientific rigor. Science, you say? Around poop? You know, there are people who actually study pooping on the streets. And please, call it open defecation, okay? Respect the profession. A study of open defecation in San Francisco, in fact, showed, there's a correlation between it and homelessness, but that access to sanitation, such as public facilities, significantly reduces the problem. And this makes way more sense than characterizing people as lawless heathens. The researchers also admit that, quote, we were unable to distinguish between reports for human versus animal feces. Is it dog? Is it human? The deuce is out there, Scully. According to the San Francisco Department of Public Works, urine tends to be concentrated around places of late-night drinking, not necessarily areas of homelessness. And you know, housed people poo and pee in the streets as well sometimes. This lady, known as
we call her the Mad Pooper of Pine Creek.
Pants around ankles, in broad daylight, her kids saw it happen first.
They came screaming, you're not going to believe this. They're like crying. It's like, what? And they're like, there's a lady taking a poop.
Well, her native habitat is the ultra-conservative town of Colorado Springs, Colorado, over which I could just as easily spin a narrative that it's all about their policy and culture of individual liberty, snowflakes who are just exerting their freedom to poop where they please. Get your together, Colorado Springs. Okay, I've talked a lot about poop and babies, and to be clear, I don't want to minimize these issues at all. I just want to shine a light on how these can get weaponized to exacerbate false narratives. Appealing to audiences' visceral disgust can lead us down the wrong path to cause undue hatred or make really bad policy decisions. And the weaponization gets worse, though, when it shifts from disgust to fears for your own safety. So, we gotta talk about it. Crime and violence. April 4th, 2023, tech executive Bob Lee, one of the founding members of Cash App, was murdered by stabbing on the streets of San Francisco. Many influential people, especially those marshaling outrage over San Francisco's disastrous appetite for more crime, chalk this up to the city's homelessness problem.
We don't know exactly what happened yet, but I think we suspect, and I would bet dollars to dimes, that this story is very similar to a case we had in LA recently, the Brianna Kupfer case, where a young woman was basically stabbed for no reason by a psychotic homeless person.
Not a day after Bob Lee's murder, former San Francisco Fire Commissioner Don Carmignan was assaulted by a, quote, transient with a metal pipe in front of his family's front door.
They say the victim tried to get away and ran toward Lombard Street, but they say the suspect kept following and beating him.
He beat them brutally. I was screaming, stop, stop, stop. I was upstairs. People were recording, but I think people are afraid because they don't know what these people have on them.
The attack was caught on film, showing him getting struck in the head multiple times, which put him in the ICU. Meanwhile, Carmignan's lawyer blamed this as a result of, quote, soft on crime policies and, quote, drug use all over San Francisco. These incidents were touted as the most on brand of San Francisco stories. That is, until they weren't. There is zero indication that Bob Lee's murder involved any homeless person, let alone a stranger. In fact, the leading suspect is one of his tech executive peers. There were 12 homicides in San Francisco that preceded the murder, none of whom got anywhere near this kind of attention. The Wall Street Journal also pointed out if there was anyone likely to be high on drugs at the time of this incident, perhaps it was Lee himself. WSJ said it, not me. In the case of Don Carmignan, maybe you know where this is headed, his assailant, Garrett Doty, pleaded self-defense after being the victim of, get this, a series of hit-and-run bear spray attacks caught on film by what looks to be perpetrated by Carmignan, once on Doty, and multiple other homeless people.
Says Carmignani is the person seen on video using bear spray on homeless people at least 8 times.
She says her client was defending himself when he struck out at Carmignani as he approached.
Though Carmignan denies any involvement, character witnesses attested to his aggressive behavior, including domestic abuse. Doty's self-defense plea was ultimately accepted. Is the moral of the story about privilege and double standards? Sure. But it really should be about not underestimating the power of narrative to really f*** with our perception. People using drugs on the street? Homelessness! Violence? Must be homelessness! Oh look, a kid got hit by a car. Clearly this has nothing to do with safe urban design and everything to do with maybe he stepped on a discarded syringe on the street from a homeless person and hopped around aimlessly on one foot saying, ow, 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 and fell into traffic. DEI!
Violent crime in SF is horrific, and even if attackers are caught, they are often released immediately.
Most people might be quite surprised to find that San Francisco actually has a very low violent crime rate compared to other major cities. And if there is an epidemic of crime and assault, it doesn't seem to be happening to housed people. Theft, assaults, and even murders happen disproportionately to the unhoused. And if only we spoke about the housed in the same way that we talk about the unhoused.
Housed man sentenced for theft. Housed man liable for sexual assault.
Housed man. Ew. What is it with these housed people?
No, the visceral fear of being attacked by homeless people has been stoked way too high. And guess what? It supersedes a lot of other dangers that you're actually more likely to face. And that exploited fear condones, no, even justifies utter cruelty, including making it illegal to feed the homeless, or thinking that it's okay to literally just ice someone because they're being too loud on public transit. If you think today's state of homelessness is absolutely unprecedented, note, this is really not the first time the doom loop narrative emerged.
Crisis of confidence in what used to be America's most confident city. Its scenic skyline is becoming a facade, hiding empty offices, partly because San Francisco is now known for AIDS as well as for cable cars.
Well, I think San Francisco ain't good to the dogs in every way.
History truly does repeat itself. Complex phenomena are always shoved through the wrong prism, and people will always show up at your door to sell you more wrong prisms. On the surface, we're having a debate about politics and government, but these are just proxies for a much deeper campaign to make homelessness not about policy, but about the deterioration of values and culture. There is a very good reason Shellenberger decided to wax philosophically in his book, not just making it about evaluating policy and homelessness strategy with statistics and stuff. No, he decides to take a seemingly wild turn into Michel Foucault and a supposed cultural epidemic of, quote, victimhood, possibly knowing that his work will have much more reach if he agitates fear stemming from prejudices. And Shellenberger is not alone. He is flanked by a number of right-wing culture warrior activists, including Christopher Rufo, who began his ascent as a grade A complainer about the homeless, before becoming a culture war strategist himself, channeling outrage against so-called wokeness and critical race theory. Before that, he lived in ultra-liberal Seattle, trying to establish himself as a policy reformer against lax enforcement against homelessness, opposing what he called the politics of ruinous compassion. Following his unsuccessful city council run in Seattle, doing his best impression of Mr. Burns, he states, "We've ceded the intellectual and moral territory to misguided principles of tolerance, diversity, and compassion."
Yes, greed and corruption and violence sucks and all, but you know what the real problem is? Tolerance, diversity, and compassion. The worst, am I right, folks? Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go club a baby seal and pee on its dead face. God bless America!
Culture warriors like Shellenberger and Rufo invite people to rally around sentiments they would be too afraid to express out in the open, such as being very mean to the homeless. The veneer of being research scientists brings an air of legitimacy to all the cruelty, funny enough. What's worse is that any attempt to call them out as wrong makes them look like iconoclasts, unafraid to call out reality, even though it is rooted in subjective fear rather than objective data.
Where a Seattle politician opposes hosing down feces-covered sidewalks because hoses are racist.
Racist? What? Who's saying that? No, really, who is saying that? That said, I'm not going to sit here and say Democratic politicians have done a great job on homelessness, but the ruse here is to assume that it's entirely their responsibility. It's the whole of society that creates homelessness, both red states and blue states, both cities and suburbs. But they don't see it that way. Culture warriors will assure people that the cruelty is deserved if laziness and victimization are the main culprits. So we've gone quite a long time about causes, but what about solutions? Well, they can be just as complicated as the causes, and if at this point you're starting to feel hopeless or confused about what to do, well, I don't blame you. A natural question to ask is, well, what should I do if I run into an unhoused person on the street? Many housed people tend to think that the only area where they may have any impact is their day-to-day encounters with homelessness. Maybe because that is when it feels most real for people.
Should I give money to the person outside my car window? Oh crap, they're coming this way.
Is this person even
Don't make eye
homeless?
contact.
Oh, it's too awkward to pull out my wallet now. Don't they just spend it on drugs and alcohol?
How do I tell this guy that he's too close to my property?
How can I monetize the shit out of this situation?
Guys, we just got this house and we're giving it to a homeless person.
So today I'm gonna go find someone on the street that's down and out, and I'm gonna show them, and we love them.
My friend, let's go get you some new clothes and some new shoes.
Today I'm
let's
gonna
go
give
get
a
you a
homeless
shower.
guy.
Let's
Put a mirage in front of society. So let's see what happens.
This day-to-day mentality is what makes some social media content on homelessness so engaging. Oftentimes, they appeal to viewers' own everyday experiences and inner dialogue about what to do in these types of situations. Some examples are genuine attempts to humanize homeless populations, to preach kindness and fight stigma. But many others can easily cross a few boundaries. It's a bit questionable as to whether people are adequately consenting to have their most undignified moments to be recorded and broadcasted on the internet. It's also unsettling to know if they are monetizing someone else's vulnerability for personal gain or social clout. But the most pernicious effect of this content is to simplify social ills as a matter of whether or not we're being generous enough in our day-to-day, rather than treat the problem as a collective responsibility. Let me explain. I don't want to discourage the sentiment and intent behind these videos. I would just prefer any content creator with benign intentions to show some introspection and consideration for more evidence-based action rather than simply advocating for kindness. There are trained professionals out there, by the way, nonprofits, relief workers, administrators, social workers, even volunteers that express just as much, if not more, kindness every day without a video camera pointed at them. If you are still confused about what to do in your day-to-day, I'd defer to founder of Union Station Homelessness, Ann Miskey.
But the fact is, give if your heart says give. If you choose not to give, that is fine too. You may choose to give to an agency that supports people experiencing homelessness or give to a cause that's important to you. That's fine. But one thing I will say is if you see someone on the streets or someone comes up and asks for money, even if you choose not to, what you can do is say hello, offer them a piece of humanity and the fact that you see them and acknowledge them as a human being. That is something all of us can give. And that is something that is incredibly healing for people because none of us want to be invisible.
Remember that kindness should be the floor, not the ceiling. If one wants to materially change the situation of homelessness, well, there's a lot of other things you can do. So if you are A, interested in evidence, and B, give a shit, consider the short, medium, and long-term solutions available to you to consider supporting through volunteer time or money donations.
True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. it comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring.
Hopefully, by now, I've convinced you that hostile measures such as tent sweeps, criminalization, incarceration, or social stigma really masks the problem rather than actually resolves it. So what's a good immediate response to homelessness? Aside from ensuring the basic safety and health of someone experiencing homelessness, the evidence shows that the most effective short-term response strategies involve shelter and access to supportive services to start them on the path toward becoming stably housed. These are often fulfilled by navigation centers, aka places of temporary room and board with limited barriers to entry, while case managers work to connect homeless individuals and families to income, public benefits, health services, permanent housing, or other shelter. There's a plethora of services out there. Unfortunately, there seems to be problems of properly connecting those services to those who need them, which is where navigation centers come in. At the time of writing, there is currently a Supreme Court case that will decide whether or not cities can clear homeless encampments even if they don't have enough shelter bed capacity in the city. And you probably won't have to guess where I fall on this issue. Sweeps are utterly terrible for those involved, especially if there's absolutely no humane alternative given, like a shelter bed. Regardless of the ruling, shelter systems need to be sufficiently expanded and of high enough quality to deliver the best immediate response for people falling into homelessness. There is a but here. Shelter systems are not a permanent solution. They don't house people for the long term, nor can they always keep people for the amount of time it takes to get on their feet. Frankly, it's not realistic to think that cities will be able to achieve some ideal capacity or quality in the near future. Shelters can also be pretty miserable places to be holed up in for too long. Sometimes these environments can be extremely unsafe. Sometimes they impose entry conditions that people are not willing to agree to, such as barring them from bringing their loved ones or pets. And in San Francisco, it's hard to determine where a lot of people go after shelter, with a lot of people leaving for unknown reasons. So if shelters and navigation centers are not nearly adequate enough to keep someone on the path to housing and independence, what then? Most people's reflexes is to focus on resolving the symptoms of homelessness, drug addiction, mental health through treatment and counseling, or job placement programs. Those things are all good and well, but really, this can all fall flat if a person experiencing homelessness does not have a stable home base for any of these benefits to truly take hold. Get a job, you say. Imagine submitting a resume without a home address. I see you live at 55 3/4? Yeah, you know, not at 55, but just outside of it, 3/4. Kind of like Harry Potter, huh? Huh? We'll call you back. The data isn't perfect, but the latest research basically shows that the most effective medium-term option is, simply put, to put them in a house. This is called the housing first approach. In theory, if a person is struggling with issues that impede their ability to maintain housing, like addiction, mental health problems, or joblessness, none of those things can be dealt with unless you deal with the housing part first. Housing first strategies often come in the form of 1, rapid rehousing, getting someone in, say, any apartment, or providing rental assistance for the near term, or 2, permanent supportive housing, an actual dedicated apartment that serves as a foundation to stand on, with which they can receive other services for job placement or mental health treatment, what have you. Life is hard enough for people who do have housing. Expecting people to piece their life together without one, on top of attending sobering programs or social worker appointments, or reporting to a job punctually. If you're trying to solve these issues without some place to call your own, well, it's going to require nothing less than miraculous effort. Now, some might say, wait, give people housing? With what money? You're not alone if you're balking at the potential price tag of just giving people housing. But you also have to realize that we're spending a crap ton on homelessness anyways, especially things that we wouldn't even easily call homelessness solutions. In case you haven't heard, homelessness incurs massive expenses in the form of city cleanup and maintenance and emergency services, police, or nonprofit services. In April 2024, Governor Gavin Newsom slammed California cities for, quote, funding waste. But does that mean we're wasting too much on actual homelessness solutions? In a spending audit of the city of San Jose, guess what the biggest line item on homelessness was? Constructing emergency housing? Oh, that's a lot of money. Rental assistance programs? Ouch, expensive. How about when the fire department responds to incidents at encampments, such as safety or health emergencies? Oh my God. Sure, just buying housing for others is expensive, but the cost of inaction is even worse. A 2015 meta-study on the matter concluded, while it is doubtful housing first programs can be expected to pay for themselves, the certainty of significant cost offsets, combined with their benefits for participants, means that they represent a more efficient allocation of resources than traditional services. And to the people who say we're just giving free handouts, Union Station Homeless Services states that it is often common for people to still have to pay 30% of their income to maintain those benefits. Of course, Housing First has its detractors for reasons other than cost. As you might expect, this idea does not sit well with conservatives.
According to a wide range of studies, Housing First programs do nothing to reduce psychiatric symptoms, reduce drug consumption, or even prevent overdose deaths.
To people who believe that everyone deserves their lot in life and that handouts discourage personal responsibility, Housing First can seem especially repugnant. You should know that Housing First does have valid criticisms, but you should also note that nothing coming from the right is ever going to help you understand that properly. To start, they can't even get the definition right. If you were to meet anyone working on Housing First programs, no one will ever tell you that Housing First means housing only. Yet if conservatives wanted you to mobilize against it, they would simply lie to you and tell you the opposite. Oh no, it's George Soros! Most of the time, it all goes hand in hand. Conservative education propaganda site, Prager U, peddles this myth, not because it's true, but because they want you to make you feel that good old-fashioned anger.
And nearly all the cities in crisis have one policy in common: Housing First.
And the Housing First model is premised on a very simple and almost intuitive idea that if you're homeless, the problem is that you need a house. And so to solve homelessness, we should merely give people homes.
And now, this policy is being pushed from the top down.
The problem with this theory is that if you look at the numbers of what's actually causing people to be homeless, it's overwhelmingly problems with mental health and drug addiction.
And Housing First requires no sobriety or treatment in order to receive permanent housing.
Instead, Prager U touts the more conservative-friendly solution is to focus on shelters.
Every individual has a right to shelter. But if we provide that shelter, you have an obligation to use it.
I guess, aren't those handouts anyways? The same video boasts the merits of this approach, supposedly adopted in San Diego, California, where its Republican mayor pursued an aggressive camping ban, but with an emphasis on shelter systems.
A series of new bridge shelters in San Diego. It's a bridge between living on the street and being able to stand on your own 2 feet in that place on your own. I don't want you off the street for a night or for a week, but we want to help provide a safe, clean, sanitary, and supportive environment to get you off the streets for good.
San Diego, as a result, was the only county where homelessness decreased.
San Diego reduced its unsheltered homeless population by more than 20% in recent years.
Wait, did I just say that right? A 20% decrease? I'd like to apologize to my audience. As much as I advocate for certain solutions, I admit they tend to bias toward my own political ideologies. I do have to admit that I find this evidence very compelling, and in the spirit of honest debate, I'd like to correct my line of argument around housing first versus shelters. And wait, that was 2 years ago. Fast forward to a more recent, what? Oh well, back to me being right all the time.
Hold! You have yet to contend with the best criticisms in this debate. Meet our anti-housing first champion of facts and logic, Michael Shellenberger!
Come on, him again.
Yes.
I will admit, Shellenberger does cite sources to his claims about the progressive causes of homelessness, housing first notwithstanding, and it's best summarized in this little Substack article of his. The underlying problem is that Newsom and other California leaders insist on housing first and oppose expanding shelters and the requirement that people use them. According to Housing First, homeless people should be given their own apartments with no requirement that they address their destructive behaviors. Period. Period, despite the fact that he gets the definition wrong as well. We already covered that housing first doesn't mean housing only. I'll be charitable and interpret him meaning that there aren't enough incentives behind housing first programs and that there needs to be more carrot and stick approaches to hold aid recipients accountable, whatever. As a result, there is a large and growing body of empirical evidence showing that housing first may be increasing addiction and overdose deaths by making quitting drugs more difficult and using them easier. Well, in the spirit of debunking his book, let's just take a stroll through his large and growing body as an example specimen to test his arguments about housing. The first source he cites is certainly critical of housing first, stating one potential risk of housing first, warned a multi-author review back in 2009, would be worsening the addiction itself, as the Federal Collaborative Initiative preliminary evaluation seemed to suggest. I tried several times to read that properly. I couldn't. I still can't. That review was Cortege et al. 2009, suggesting that housing first may be a form of overreach due to the lack of sufficient data. My response? Well, first, you can't draw definitive evaluation data of housing first from this study, which does the weak-ass maneuver that we all know in the social sciences of saying that more studies are needed. Secondly, a recent meta-analysis by Sleznick et al. In 2023 showed that current research efforts to guide best practices are hampered by a lack of fidelity to housing first principles, lack of randomized design, and lack of focus on youth. In other words, people claiming to show whether housing first actually works aren't really looking at the housing first. Several trials, including Cortege et al. 2009, show implementation drifts from core tenets of housing first, including choice over housing and the use of supportive services and abstinent-based housing, thus muddling conclusions regarding the effectiveness of housing first programming that is supposedly based upon a housing first philosophy. Source number 2, Shellenberger cites Turner et al. 2017, stating one study found that while the housing first group kept people in housing longer, the comparison group saw greater reductions in alcohol consumption, problematic drug use, and greater improvements to mental health after 2 years. Ooh, searing indictment of housing first! To point out that the program, quote, kept people in housing longer. Okay, isn't that a win? But let's be fair, the comparison group supposedly had better outcomes on mental health and addiction. But you don't need my opinion to elaborate what the authors meant by that conclusion. I'm gonna have the authors of that same paper explain themselves. One reason for the surprising results related to non-housing outcomes may be that aspects of housing first interventions, such as privacy afforded by housing first and the harm reduction approach, might result in slower improvements around substance abuse and mental health. The greater improvements in non-housing outcomes experienced by the comparison group also could be due to the selection of participants. Thus, housing first clients may have more chronic ongoing challenges that require more time to assess. In other words, the authors would not dare claim that they would ditch housing first. In fact, what Shellenberger points to as proof he is right is basically saying he's wrong. The primary objective of housing first is to ensure that vulnerable people become and stay housed. On this count, The current study affirms previous findings that Housing First is successful in enabling people with serious mental illness, including those with problematic substance abuse, to exit homelessness quickly and establish housing stability. Now, we may have already established that this seems to be a shitty habit of Shellenberger to use researchy language and study citations to give his arguments the semblance of being objective, only to hide the fact that most of his sources seem to contradict directly what he's trying to say. And trust me, it only gets worse. Shellenberger. In 2018, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine published a review of the scientific literature of Housing First. Quote, "On the basis of currently available research," wrote the report's authors, "the committee found no substantial evidence that permanent supportive housing contributes to improved health outcomes, notwithstanding the intuitive logic that it should." Ooh, additional searing indictment of housing. And yes, I guess it's a little bit disappointing to see the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine coming to the conclusion that Housing First is a failure. Wait a minute. Keep reading the same paragraph. Of the studies that were more rigorous, go on. The committee found that housing increases the well-being of persons experiencing homelessness. Perhaps this shall compel us to read on. Like, the entire study acknowledges some weaknesses of Housing First, given what we don't know, but it affirms that given what we do know, that Housing First, aka permanent supportive housing, quote, maintains housing stability for most people experiencing chronic homelessness, quote, reducing the number of persons experiencing chronic homelessness, but also for improving their health outcomes, quote, is important in increasing the ability of some individuals to become and remain housed. Why are you selling me this bill of goods, son? Did you not think I was gonna check that shit? If you're like me and you are curious about what objectively works, what are strengths and weaknesses, like, this is what we're up against. Like, this guy's a best-selling author, but he doesn't read like any of his sources. Or is he just betting on his audience's ignorance that they will take his face value or not care about this like brazen cherry picking? Like, I don't mind having a debate on the demerits of Housing First, but holy hell, like, represent your large and growing body of sources, like, with a shred of honesty. God. All of the short and medium-term solutions I've discussed so far ask the important questions about direct interventions, aka, how do we tackle homelessness head on when it's right there in front of us? Yes, but we also need to dig into the problem at the roots as well and look at the structural thingies that produce homelessness in the first place. We do have to fully understand homelessness as a problem of long-term systemic factors like unhealthy housing markets instead of just the lack of shelters and services. It's just too hard to ignore the data that homelessness tends to proliferate in places where rents are obscenely high, where housing supply does not rise in tandem with rapid economic and population growth, and where people have trouble competing for scarce housing and fall perilously through the cracks. But how do we fix housing markets? I know, it's a question that's been grappled with for centuries, but the answer may surprise you. If you want to fix housing markets, you simply have to then wave the severed head for all to see. See? I know economics. That was a joke. That was a joke. I have to be humble here. Even though research suggests that homelessness boils down to housing markets, the ways of repairing them are numerous and controversial with no easy answers. That doesn't mean it's not worth trying, though. Yes, it's complicated to think that little old us can exercise any agency in the juggernaut of systemic problems. And yes, it's certainly not sexy at all to take your focus off things that you can see on the street, like directly helping a homeless person, to things that most people don't see, like wonking out about indirect advocacy and upstream policy effects. Yes, all this because some dip YouTuber showed you a graph. to some cool music. To my average viewer, this is my plea. Look at the environment around you and begin to recognize the political choices your local community makes to optimize your environment to produce more homelessness. Try to find the political obstruction that creates massive delays, driving up costs and constricting the supply of both privately and publicly funded housing. As a San Franciscan, I have a very sore memory of this one affordable housing project that didn't get built due to community opposition. Local policy in San Francisco allows even the most trivial of concerns, zoning, aesthetics, ironically, the prospect of homeless people, to gum up processes and basically drain the entire budget of the affordable housing developer. In case you haven't heard, building housing is expensive. Land is expensive. Nonsensical red tape that wealthy homeowners put up to discourage development is expensive. Convoluted regulation that leaves the future of your 100% affordable housing project at the whims of community hearings and politicians who have no incentive to approve your project. All Observe the way that communities have mini freakouts at the prospect of apartment buildings, even on really small plots of land, all out of fear of compromising neighborhood character or a decrease to their property values, or bringing in working class populations close to where they live. I actually made a video on this. It only has like 1,000 views. Watch it, please. Observe how we apportion land and property in incredibly inefficient ways. How we dedicate an absurdly gratuitous amount of space to roads, parking lots, etc. In other words, we love to give space to cars. Cars in motion, cars not in motion. Rather than, houses for people to live in. Can you guess who in this picture gets to stay in place comfortably and legally? Ha, trick question. But we're not just talking about blocking housing either. These obstructions are also responsible for blocking short to medium term homelessness solutions. A navigation center here in San Francisco almost wasn't built due to community opposition, with literal chance of build it somewhere else, build it at City Hall. If you're working in homelessness services and you're simply trying to do your job, it's no wonder that the political barriers due to NIMBYism stop you in your tracks and delay your project. Ned Resnikov of the organization California YIMBY, standing for Yes in My Backyard, showed that if you want to execute a housing first program, it's far easier in healthier housing markets. The cost to provide housing to a single recipient in San Francisco, for example, is 3 to 4 times more than it is in Houston, where housing growth has much more rapidly kept up with demand and does not have the same political barriers erected by NIMBY homeowners. We know that fixing housing is not going to happen overnight, but simplifying the processes that make beneficial neighborhood change possible, such as more housing or much needed homelessness facilities like shelters, well, that lies in the subtle local political processes and whether or not you, yes, you, are actually paying attention to them.
Hi, we're here on the 4th floor of City Hall, and this is a room where the Planning Commission and Historic Preservation Commission meet. The Planning Commission creates policies, approves or denies land use projects, and they also make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors on legislation. The Historic Preservation Commission makes rulings on properties that are considered historic resources. They also make
I know, it seems incredibly boring and esoteric, but I mean it. You have way more power than you expect. And it takes just a little bit of patience with process and know-how to wrest control from NIMBYs or other reactionaries who really couldn't care less about fixing homelessness. Do you know who your local politician is? City planning commissioner, city council member, mayor, state representative? Spoiler, it's not Sleepy Joe. Chocolate chip. Are you familiar with your local activist group? Fighting for more housing or less homelessness, who you can join? No? Well, maybe it's time to find out. I can't continue on without acknowledging that this emphasis on housing markets can be controversial. To some folks, talk of fixing markets is irrelevant because markets, aka capitalism, is what really got us into this mess in the first place. Oakland, California, right across the water from San Francisco, a group of mothers and their children occupied a vacant house to defy eviction, homelessness, and to flip the bird at big real estate. The group was named Moms for Housing, and they were appalled that the city of Oakland, with so many vacant housing units, would allow homelessness to thrive on its streets. The overarching idea, felt by many, is that building more housing is actually not necessary at all. It's the commodification of housing that is ultimately responsible, and that first needs to be dealt with. Otherwise, housing is left to remain a speculative asset to be traded, hoarded, or left empty by the investment class. And really, isn't that the fundamental problem with capitalism? Unparalleled abundance, always unreachable by the people who need it most? Let me just say I support the sentiment, and that there is some truth to it. But I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that it really doesn't drive robust conclusions about what to do. Let's inquire for a moment. According to the US Census, there are about 13.5 million vacant units in the United States. That is enough to house America's homeless population of around 650,000, 20 times over. But wait, this is the type of statistical maneuvering that I warned against, that there is always this magic ratio indicator of vacant homes divided by homeless population. But scratch the surface and unfortunately, it's a really piss poor indicator of housing abundance. What are these homes that the census defines as vacant? Unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily mean available or viable for living, even squatting. Vacant can mean it's in unreachable, far-flung regions where no one wants to live. Some are unlivable due to dilapidation and construction. Some are actually owned by vacation homes. Some don't even remain vacant for that long. Researcher Darrell Owens tests the vacancy theory on San Francisco, though technically San Francisco shows around 4 vacancies for every 1 homeless person. He also shows that controlling for multiple factors, the real vacancy rate leaves only between 11 and 14,000 likely viable homes for an estimated homeless population of about 18,000. Now that doesn't seem nearly enough to house the unhoused. And he rightly so points out this: if anyone stands to gain from constricted supply and low vacancy rates, it's certainly not homeless people, but rather the investment class. Quoting from the SEC filings of private equity firm Blackstone through their subsidiary Invitation Homes, they would be adversely affected by overbuilding and high vacancy rates. And also that continuing development of apartment buildings and condominium units will increase the supply of housing and reduce rents. God forbid. Let's give the ratio a rest for a sec and consider a much more important factor: the level of mobility people are able to exercise within a healthy housing market. In other words, there needs to be a freely interchangeable and fluid dimension to housing that people often take for granted. Ever try playing those sliding tile puzzle games? Ever try playing it without the vacant space? If you think about it, no one stays in a house or an apartment forever, nor do they only leave by eviction. People need to move around for myriad reasons, myriad good reasons: to be closer to jobs, loved ones, to immigrate, to leave abusive relationships, just move. Don't get me wrong, vacancy rates matter, but at least at this time, they aren't great arguments against more housing being built. In fact, if you look at the corollary data, well, it's not looking good for anti-development proponents. It was covered in, you guessed it, homelessness is a housing problem, where higher vacancy rates correlate with lower rates of homelessness. So, with your newly realized political power intended to make a dent in homelessness, you can fight for tenant protections, eviction defense, tax penalties on vacant apartment buildings, but also note that it's not going to solve our problems for as long as our neighborhoods are frozen in amber, especially these ones. And these ones. Are any of these two things meant to stay frozen in time? And if your response is still, not in my backyard, then you prove my point, that homelessness is less a problem of individual choices and daily habits and incidental misfortunes, and more a problem imposed on them by the subtle actions of the housed, who, through everyday obstinacy, which may seem harmless and benign, actually produces more homelessness. And if it is done by subtle everyday action, then what can be the subtle everyday undoing?